We know that many of you come to these essays not just to sleep, but because during the day your mind is too full, too noisy. That's why we create these pieces deep enough for you to feel nourished, yet gentle enough for you to let go. Tonight, we explore something that touches nearly everyone who listens to psychology for sleep content like this. Something you might have blamed yourself for countless times. Something that feels like a personal failing, but is actually a profound psychological protection mechanism that began long before you were old enough to understand it. Imagine, if you will, a writing desk positioned near a window. It's that hour just before dawn when the world exists in gradual revelation. Mist clings to the glass, softening the edges of everything. The house around you is perfectly still. No sounds except perhaps the distant hum of a refrigerator, the subtle creaking of wood, settling your own breathing. On the desk sits an open laptop, its screen glowing pale blue in the dim light. The cursor blinks, on and off, on and off. A steady rhythm like a heartbeat, like a question being asked again and again without words. The document is blank, or perhaps there are a few lines written, then deleted, then written again differently. You can feel the weight of it, not the laptop itself, but what it represents. That thing you've been meaning to do, the project you've been putting off, the email you need to send, the application that's been sitting half complete for weeks, maybe months, the creative work that matters to you more than you'd admit to anyone, which is precisely why you can't seem to finish it. The air in the room tastes cool, slightly stale from being closed all night. You might reach for a cup of coffee that's gone lukewarm, or pull a blanket tighter around your shoulders. Outside, the first birds begin their tentative calls, testing whether it's safe to announce the coming day. The sky shifts from black to deep purple, to that particular shade of gray that isn't quite darkness anymore, but isn't yet light. This is a threshold moment, a liminal space between intention and action, between sleep and waking, between who you were yesterday and who you might become today. And in this space, there's a heaviness, not physical exhaustion, though you might be tired, but something else. A weight that lives somewhere between your chest and your throat. A quiet, persistent sense that you're failing at something fundamental. You might think procrastination is a time management problem. You might call yourself lazy, undisciplined, or unmotivated. These are the words we use, the explanations that feel obvious. But what if the reason you can't seem to finish things or even start them has nothing to do with productivity at all? What if it's not about your calendar, but about your history? Because for many people, procrastination isn't the problem, it's a symptom. A quiet, unseen effect of childhood shame. Not shame about what you did, but shame about who you were told to be. Or perhaps more accurately, shame about who you were told you couldn't be. Shame about your very nature, your fundamental self, the aliveness that once felt natural until someone taught you it was too much, too loud, too intense, too sensitive, too different. We live in an era of constant stimulation and performance. Every platform demands content. Every moment invites documentation. The pressure to be productive has reached levels that would have seemed absurd to previous generations. We carry devices that notify us constantly, that measure our steps and our sleep, and our screen time, that remind us of tasks undone and messages unanswered. In the 1800s, when people spoke of melancholy or ennui, they were grappling with something similar to what we now call procrastination, though the language was different. The philosopher Kierkegaard wrote extensively about paralysis in the face of choice, about how too much self-awareness could freeze a person in inaction. But he was observing something that has existed much longer than our modern productivity culture. Man was learning to numerically relate his output to his worth, long before time tracking apps existed. The Industrial Revolution crystallized this connection, making visible and measurable what had once been intuitive and flexible. But the shame that drives our modern procrastination has roots that go deeper than capitalism or technology. It touches something more fundamental about human development, about how we learn to hide parts of ourselves, to survive in families and cultures that can't always hold our full complexity. This is what we'll explore tonight through the lens of Carl Jung's psychology for sleep and waking both. Throughout history, shame and hesitation have fascinated philosophers, theologians, psychologists, and storytellers. We will explore how this pattern appears across time and culture. From ancient philosophers wrestling with weakness of will, to medieval monks facing spiritual paralysis, to modern neuroscience revealing how childhood experiences literally shape our nervous systems, to Jung's deep understanding of how we hide from ourselves to feel safe. The journey ahead moves through 4 territories. First, we'll understand procrastination, not as a time management failure, but as an emotional protection system with roots in early development. Then, we'll see how this pattern appears in myths, fairy tales, and archetypal stories that have been told for thousands of years. Next, we'll ground our understanding in scientific research about how shame lives in the brain and body. And finally, we'll turn to the harder work of integration, asking not just what procrastination is, but what it's asking you to face about yourself and your unlived life. This is psychology for sleep in the truest sense. Not to put you to sleep through boredom, though if sleep comes, welcome it, but to create a space where your unconscious mind can begin to process what your conscious mind has been avoiding, to plant seeds that might germinate in dreams or in the quiet spaces between waking thoughts. Let us begin. Shame begins when you're first told you're too much. We tend to think of shame as something that comes from doing something wrong, a specific mistake, a clear transgression. You broke the vase. You lied to your teacher. You hurt someone's feelings. Those moments carry guilt, which is uncomfortable, but relatively straightforward. Guilt says, I did something bad. Shame says something far more devastating. Shame says, I am bad. But the kind of shame that shapes your adult life, the kind that shows up decades later as chronic procrastination, doesn't usually come from a single mistake. It comes from being made to feel that your being was wrong, your nature, your essence, the way you moved through the world before you learned to edit yourself. And it starts early. So early that you may not even realize how deeply it's wired into your sense of self. You're probably just being yourself. Maybe you were full of questions, the kind of child who asked, why? until the adults around you grew impatient. Maybe you were full of energy, movement, sound, the kind of aliveness that's natural to children, but exhausting to stressed or overwhelmed parents. Maybe you cried easily when your feelings were hurt, or you laughed loudly at things that delighted you, or you had big dreams and a wild imagination that spilled out in elaborate stories or drawings or games. Then someone reacted. They told you to calm down, to grow up, to stop being dramatic. They said you were too sensitive, too intense, too needy. Or maybe they didn't say anything at all, which somehow felt worse. They just looked at you with disappointment, or they withdrew affection when you needed it most, or they turned away with a sigh that communicated more clearly than words that you were exhausting them, burdening them, that your natural self was somehow a problem they had to manage. And you didn't understand why. You were just being you. But suddenly your presence seemed to create tension. Being seen, being heard, being fully yourself led to discomfort in the people you depended on for survival. And discomfort for a child feels dangerous in ways that adults often forget. When you're small and utterly dependent, the adults in your life are your world. Their approval isn't just nice to have. It feels necessary for your continued existence. Carl Jung believed that what we repress as children doesn't disappear. It goes underground. It becomes part of what he called the shadow, the hidden unconscious parts of us that continue to influence our behavior from behind the scenes, like a puppeteer working strings we can't see. He wrote, "The acceptance of oneself is the essence of the whole moral problem and the epitome of a whole outlook on life. But how can you accept yourself when you were taught early on that your very nature was a problem? When the feedback you received, implicit or explicit, was that you needed to be different, smaller, quieter, less alive in order to be loved. So you adapted. You tried to become more acceptable. This is what children do because they have no choice. You smiled when you didn't feel happy. You stayed quiet when something inside you wanted to speak. You made yourself smaller, more careful, more palatable to the people whose love you needed. You started editing yourself, learning which parts of you were acceptable and which parts needed to be hidden. And over time, this editing becomes so automatic, you don't even notice you're doing it. It becomes your normal way of moving through the world. But your nervous system does notice. It keeps the score, as trauma researcher Bessel van der Kolk would say, decades after Jung's work. Your body remembers every moment you had to disappear a piece of yourself to stay safe. Shame is not loud. It doesn't always announce itself with big emotional displays or obvious self-hatred. Sometimes it shows up in quiet hesitation, in the way you pause before saying what you think, second-guessing whether your thoughts are worth sharing, in the way you water down your ideas, qualifying everything with, "I might be wrong, but," or "this is probably stupid, but," in the way you hesitate to take action, not because you lack ability, but because some buried part of you still fears rejection. Jung also said, "We cannot change anything unless we accept it. Condemnation does not liberate. It oppresses." So many people condemn themselves for procrastinating without understanding what they're really responding to. They call themselves lazy, weak, undisciplined. They beat themselves up thinking that if they can just hate themselves enough, they'll finally change. But shame doesn't create transformation. it creates more shame. It creates a loop because shame has a memory. And even if your adult mind has moved on, even if you rationally know you're not that vulnerable child anymore, your emotional body still remembers the first time it was punished for being real. It remembers the sting of rejection, the confusion of not understanding why your natural self was wrong, the desperate scrambling to figure out what version of yourself might be acceptable. And this memory doesn't fade with time. It shapes the way you relate to effort expression and even success. It's no surprise then that the things you want most: creative freedom, recognition, self-trust, authentic expression, are also the things that feel the most dangerous because they require visibility. They require you to be seen fully. And visibility was what once got you hurt. Think about the times you've delayed something important to you. Not some boring obligation you don't care about, but something you actually want to do, something that matters, something that represents your deeper values or desires. You've told yourself you'll do it tomorrow. You found very reasonable sounding excuses. You've done other productive things instead, easier things, safer things. But if you're honest, really honest, it's not because you didn't care. It's because you cared so much. It scared you. Deep down beneath all the rational explanations, a part of you remembers. The last time I was fully myself. The last time I was really visible. It wasn't safe. I was rejected, criticized, misunderstood, shamed. And so procrastination becomes your body's way of saying, not yet. It doesn't trust that it will be met with acceptance. It doesn't believe the world is safer now than it was then. And maybe in some ways, it's right to be cautious. The world can be harsh. People do judge. Failure is painful. Rejection hurts. But here's what your protective system doesn't account for. The cost of never trying is also painful. The weight of unlived potential is its own kind of suffering. The shame of hiding becomes heavier than the shame of being seen and rejected. This is where the root of procrastination begins. Not with laziness, but with fear. A fear that was planted early in moments where you were told you were too loud, too sensitive, too opinionated, too emotional, too much, or not enough, not smart enough, not talented enough, not worthy enough of the space you were taken up. And instead of questioning them, you questioned yourself. That's what shame does. It turns what was done to you into something wrong with you. It makes you believe that hiding is safer than being honest, that holding back is smarter than showing up, that not trying is better than being seen and possibly rejected. But what if you're not too much? What if you never were? What if you were simply too alive for someone who didn't know how to handle your aliveness? What if your exuberance or sensitivity or intensity or creativity wasn't a problem, but a gift that the people around you weren't equipped to receive? What if your procrastination isn't a flaw, but a message from the part of you that still believes being seen will cost you something? Jung believed in bringing the shadow into the light. He believed that the parts of us we hide are not our enemies. They are the keys to our wholeness. The disowned sensitivity, the hidden ambition, the repressed creativity, the forbidden anger. These aren't problems to eliminate. They're parts of yourself waiting to be reclaimed and integrated. So the next time you catch yourself hesitating, delaying, distracting yourself from something that matters, pause. Not to shame yourself, not to force yourself into action, but to ask, what part of me is afraid, and what does that part remember? Because that's where healing begins, not in pushing harder, but in listening deeper, not in fixing your productivity, but in reclaiming the parts of you that were once made to feel unworthy of being seen. In ancient times across many cultures, there existed understanding of what we might now call shame-based paralysis, though they used different language. The Greeks had a word akrasia, which philosophers like Aristotle explored at length. It meant something like weakness of will, knowing the good, but being unable to do it. Why would someone know what's right and not do it? Aristotle struggled with this question because it challenged the assumption that humans are rational beings who naturally act in their best interest. But Aristotle was observing something deeper than simple irrationality. He was seeing the gap between intellectual knowledge and embodied action. You can know you should exercise, eat well, finish your project, have that difficult conversation. But knowing doesn't translate automatically into doing. Because action requires not just knowledge, but emotional safety. And for people carrying childhood shame, action, especially visible action, that might be judged, triggers old warnings in the nervous system. In medieval monasteries, monks wrote extensively about something they called acedia. It's often translated as sloth, one of the 7 deadly sins. But the original meaning was more nuanced. St. Thomas Aquinas described it as a sorrow about spiritual good. Not laziness exactly, but a paralysis in the face of what matters most. The monks recognized that the things that should bring us closest to meaning or purpose could also be the things we most avoid. Why? Because approaching what truly matters requires vulnerability. It requires us to care deeply, to try sincerely, to risk discovering that we might fail, or that we might not be who we hope we are. Acedia in this understanding wasn't about not caring. It was about caring so much that the caring itself became paralyzing. Consider Shakespeare's Hamlet, perhaps literature's most famous procrastinator. He knows his uncle murdered his father. He knows he should act, but he delays questions, overthinks, creates test after test to verify what he already knows is true. Why Shakespeare understood something profound about human psychology. Hamlet's delay isn't about lacking information or opportunity. It's about the existential weight of irreversible action. As Hamlet himself says, "Conscience doth make cowards of us all." Conscience here means not just moral awareness, but self-consciousness. The more aware you become of yourself, of the implications of your actions, of how you might be perceived or judged, the harder it becomes to act with the unself-conscious freedom of someone who doesn't yet know enough to be afraid. The philosopher Søren Kierkegaard, writing in the 19th century, explored this paralysis through his concepts of anxiety and despair. He understood that modern self-awareness created new forms of psychological suffering. The more choices we have, the more we understand the weight of those choices, the more paralyzing decision-making becomes. This is what he called the dizziness of freedom. But Kierkegaard also saw that much of our paralysis comes from living inauthentically, from trying to be who others expect rather than who we truly are. Despair in his philosophy is ultimately about being unable to be yourself. And procrastination, though he didn't use that word, is one manifestation of this despair. You delay, because the action you're avoiding requires you to be more authentic than you feel safe being. Dostoevsky's underground man, that archetype of hyper-conscious paralysis, understands this perfectly. He thinks himself into complete inaction. He sees every angle, anticipates every potential criticism, imagines every possible outcome until he's frozen. He's brilliant and miserable, aware of everything, and capable of nothing. Why? Because somewhere in his development, he learned that being seen meant being destroyed. So he retreats underground into his head, where he can maintain the fantasy of potential without the risk of actual exposure. Now, in our contemporary moment, researchers have given us new language for these ancient patterns. Dr. Timothy Feichel at Carleton University has spent decades studying procrastination and has made a revolutionary observation. Procrastination is not a time management problem. It's an emotion regulation problem. We procrastinate not because we don't know how to manage our schedule, but because we're trying to manage uncomfortable emotions associated with the task. What emotions? Often shame, the fear of not being good enough, the terror of being exposed as inadequate, the dread of confirming our worst beliefs about ourselves. Dr. Joseph Ferrari, who researches chronic procrastination, has identified different types. There are arousal procrastinators who thrive on the adrenaline of last-minute work. But more common and more painful are avoidant procrastinators, people who delay because approaching the task feels emotionally dangerous. His research consistently shows that chronic procrastination correlates strongly with low self-esteem and fear of evaluation. Not laziness, fear. Dr. Brené Brown's research on shame has illuminated how deeply shame affects our willingness to be visible. She defines shame as the intensely painful feeling that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. And her research shows that shame is one of the most powerful predictors of destructive behaviors, including procrastination. Because when you believe you're fundamentally flawed, why would you put yourself in situations where that flaw might be revealed? Modern studies on adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, have demonstrated clear connections between childhood emotional environments and adult behavioral patterns. Children who grew up with harsh criticism, conditional love, or emotional neglect show significantly higher rates of procrastination in adulthood. Not because they were taught poor time management skills, but because they learned that being visible, trying hard, and potentially failing felt emotionally dangerous. This is psychology for sleep, in the sense that these patterns often operate beneath our conscious awareness in the dreaming space between stimulus and response. Understanding procrastination requires us to make conscious what has been unconscious, to see the protective mechanisms our psyche created when we were too young to have other options. There are benefits to procrastination, strange as that sounds, or rather, there are functions it serves. Understanding these functions is crucial because they explain why procrastination persists, even when we consciously want to change. The behavior continues because at some level it's working, not helping us achieve our goals, but protecting us from something our psyche has deemed more dangerous than failure. First, emotional protection. Procrastination creates a buffer between you and potential judgment. If you delay working on something until the last minute, you have a built-in excuse if it's not perfect. You can tell yourself and others, well, I didn't really have time to do my best work. This protects your ego, your sense of self-worth. Dr. Fuskia Siroa at Durham University has found that procrastinators often have significant deficits in self-compassion. They're harsh judges of themselves, which makes any potential criticism from others feel unbearable. Procrastination becomes a way to avoid that unbearable feeling. I remember speaking with a writer who had been working on her novel for 7 years. Or rather, not working on it. She'd write a chapter, then revise it endlessly, never moving forward. When we explored what was underneath the delay, she realized she was terrified. If she finished the book and submitted it, and it was rejected, she'd have to face the possibility that she wasn't the writer she believed herself to be. As long as the book remained unfinished, she could maintain the fantasy that it might be brilliant, that she might be talented, that her dream might still come true. Procrastination was protecting her idealized self-image from reality testing. Second, identity preservation. There's a painful but effective strategy that procrastinators often employ unconsciously. By not trying fully, you preserve the belief that you could have succeeded if you'd really tried. This is different from actually succeeding, but it's safer. A student who doesn't study can tell themselves they would have aced the test if they'd studied. They preserve their identity as someone who's naturally intelligent. But if they study hard and still fail, they have to confront the possibility that maybe they're not as smart as they thought. Procrastination in this case is protecting a core belief about the self. Third, nervous system regulation. When a task triggers shame memories, even if you're not consciously aware of the connection, your nervous system can respond as if you're facing a threat. Dr. Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory helps us understand this. He identifies 3 states of nervous system activation. The ventral vagal state, where we feel safe and socially engaged. The sympathetic state, where we're in fight or flight. And the dorsal vagal state, where we're in freeze or shut down. Procrastination often represents this third state. Your nervous system has assessed the situation and determined that the safest response is to freeze, to not move, to wait. I worked with a man who couldn't bring himself to prepare for presentations at work, despite public speaking being crucial to his career advancement. Every time he sat down to work on a presentation, he'd find himself unable to focus. He'd get up, make coffee, check email, do anything else. Through our conversations, he remembered being called on in 3rd grade and giving a wrong answer. The teacher had ridiculed him in front of the class, and the other children had laughed. That was 30 years ago, but his nervous system remembered. Presentation preparation triggered the same shame and threat response. His procrastination was his body saying, "This is dangerous. Don't move. Wait." 4th, control maintenance. For some people, especially those who grew up in chaotic or controlling environments, procrastination becomes a way of asserting autonomy. If you felt powerless as a child, having control over when or whether you do something can feel essential to your sense of self. Even if it's self-destructive, the ability to say, "I'll do it when I'm ready," feels like reclaiming agency. The problem is that this kind of control is ultimately an illusion. You're not free. You're imprisoned by the need to resist. Understanding these functions doesn't mean accepting procrastination as inevitable. It means approaching it with compassion and curiosity rather than self-condemnation. When you understand what procrastination is protecting you from, you can begin to address the actual problem rather than just the symptom. So, what can you do? Not in the sense of quick fixes, because there are none, but in terms of practices that support gradual healing and integration. On a micro level, try the 2-minute rule. Commit to working on the avoided task for just 2 minutes. Not to finish it, not even to make significant progress, just to make contact with it. Often the hardest part is starting. Once you're engaged, continuing becomes easier. But even if you stop after 2 minutes, you've accomplished something crucial. You've practiced approaching rather than avoiding. You've sent a signal to your nervous system that this thing isn't as dangerous as it feels. Another micro practice is shame awareness check-ins. When you notice yourself procrastinating, pause. Don't judge yourself. Just notice and ask, what feeling am I avoiding right now? Often you'll discover it's not about the task itself. It's about what the task represents. The paper you're avoiding might represent the fear of not being smart enough. The job application might represent the fear of rejection. The creative project might represent the fear that you're not actually talented. Naming the real fear reduces its power. Body-based awareness can also help. Where in your body do you feel tension or discomfort when you think about the avoided task? Your chest, your throat, your stomach. Just noticing without trying to change it can be powerful. Your body is trying to tell you something. Listen to it with kindness. On a more structured level, shame resilience practices can be transformative. Brené Brown outlines a process. Recognize when you're in shame reality. Check the shame messages, reach out to someone you trust, and speak the shame. Shame thrives in secrecy and silence. When you can say to someone, I'm avoiding this project because I'm terrified I'm not good enough, the shame loses some of its grip. You've made it conscious. You've connected rather than isolated. This is crucial work. Weekly completion celebrations might sound silly, but they rewire neural pathways. Your brain has associated completion with potential shame and judgment. You need to create new associations. Completion can mean celebration, not evaluation. When you finish something, anything, take a moment to acknowledge it. Not with judgment about quality, just acknowledgement of the act of completion. Over time, this can help your nervous system learn that following through feels good, not dangerous. Accountability partnerships work best when they're focused on process rather than outcome. Find someone who understands that you're not looking for judgment, but for witnessing. Someone you can check in with and say, I'm going to work on this for 30 minutes, and then afterward report back. Not about results, but about the fact that you showed up. The shame that drives procrastination often includes the fear of disappointing others. Having someone who won't be disappointed, who's just there to support your practice of showing up, can be healing. For deeper work, immersive experiences like shame resilience, workshops, or therapeutic retreats addressing childhood emotional wounds can be powerful. This isn't something you can think your way through. It requires feeling, remembering, processing. Professional support from a therapist trained in attachment or trauma can make an enormous difference. especially if your procrastination is rooted in early relational wounds. The integration strategy is crucial. You're not trying to eliminate procrastination entirely. You're trying to develop a wiser relationship with it. You're learning to distinguish between helpful caution and protective avoidance. Sometimes delay is wise. Sometimes you do need more information or more time. The key is honesty with yourself about what's actually happening. And you're trying to create conditions of safety, not perfect safety because that doesn't exist, but safe enough. Safe enough to take a risk. Safe enough to be visible. Safe enough to try and possibly fail. This is different from forcing yourself to be fearless. It's about acknowledging the fear and moving forward anyway gently, with self-compassion. Several books can deepen this understanding. The Procrastination Equation by Dr. Piers Steele offers a mathematical framework for understanding why we delay. Solving the Procrastination Puzzle by Dr. Timothy Cycle provides practical emotion-focused strategies. Daring Greatly by Dr. Brené Brown explores shame, resilience, and vulnerability in depth. The Body Keeps the Score by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk explains how trauma, including the trauma of childhood shame, lives in the body and affects behavior. These texts can provide both understanding and tools for the journey ahead. But here are the warnings, the nuances that matter. First, the risk of psychological bypassing. Understanding that procrastination comes from childhood shame can become its own form of avoidance. You can think about it, talk about it, analyze it endlessly without ever actually changing. Knowledge without action is another form of procrastination. The point of understanding is to enable compassionate movement forward, not to create more sophisticated excuses. Second, the risk of perfectionism disguised as self-compassion. You might tell yourself, I need to heal fully before I start. I need to work through all my childhood issues before I can move forward on my goals. This is a trap. Healing isn't linear. You don't heal first and then live. You heal through living through the repeated experience of being visible and surviving, of trying and discovering you're more resilient than you thought. Third, the risk of pathologizing normal hesitation. Not all delay is trauma response. Sometimes you genuinely need more time, more information, more rest. Sometimes procrastination is your intuition telling you that a goal isn't actually yours, that you're chasing someone else's dream or society's expectations, rather than your own authentic desire. The key distinction: does the delay serve your growth or your fear? Understanding procrastination through psychological and historical lenses reveals it as a protection mechanism, not a character flaw. It shows us the deep roots of a pattern that can feel shameful and isolating, but is actually a common human response to emotional wounding. Yet beneath this behavioral pattern lies an even deeper layer of meaning. This is the territory of story and symbol, where we discover that the struggle with procrastination isn't just personal. It's archetypal. It's part of the human story that's been told and retold for thousands of years in myths, fairy tales, and literature. And there we begin to see the shapes of ourselves in ancient patterns. Carl Jung's great contribution to psychology was his recognition that certain patterns repeat across all human cultures and throughout history. He called these patterns archetypes, universal forms or images that reside in what he termed the collective unconscious. These aren't just metaphors or interesting stories. They're fundamental structures of human experience that shape how we understand ourselves and our journey through life. The archetype most relevant to understanding procrastination and shame is the shadow. Jung defined the shadow as everything the subject refuses to acknowledge about themselves. But here's what most people misunderstand about the shadow. It doesn't just contain obviously negative traits like rage or greed or cruelty. It also contains our unexpressed creativity, our disowned desires, our hidden gifts. The shadow contains everything we pushed away to be acceptable, to survive, to fit in. When you procrastinate, you're often avoiding an encounter with your shadow. You're avoiding the parts of yourself that once got you in trouble, that were rejected, that learned to hide. Maybe your shadow contains your ambition because you learned that wanting too much made you seem greedy or selfish. Maybe it contains your creativity because you were mocked for being different. Maybe it contains your vulnerability because you were punished for showing weakness. Procrastination becomes the guardian of the shadow, keeping you from approaching the work that would require those disowned parts to emerge. If you write that book, you have to let your authentic voice be heard. If you start that business, you have to let your ambition be visible. If you make that art, you have to reveal your unique perspective. And if those parts of you are still associated with shame, your psyche will resist. It will delay. It will protect you from re-experiencing the original wound. There's another archetype Jung identified that's crucial here, the wounded child. This is the part of you that carries early experiences of being hurt, neglected, criticized, or shamed. The wounded child doesn't live in the past. It lives in you in the present, still responding to old threats. When you procrastinate often, the wounded child is activated, remembering times when being visible or trying hard led to pain. The work of integration requires you to acknowledge this child, to understand their fear, but not to let them control your adult life. You need to reparent them, which we'll explore more deeply later. For now, understand that your procrastination might be the wounded child's way of keeping you safe from dangers that no longer exist in the same way they once did. Jung also wrote about the threshold guardian, an archetypal figure that appears in myths and stories worldwide. This is the force or figure that tests whether the hero is ready to proceed on their journey. It asks, are you prepared for what comes next? Have you done the inner work necessary for transformation? Procrastination can be understood as your internal threshold guardian. It's not just resistance, it's a test. It's asking whether you're truly ready to move into a more visible, more authentic, more vulnerable version of your life. And maybe sometimes the answer is honestly, not yet. Maybe you do need more preparation, more healing, more integration. But often, the threshold guardian isn't actually blocking you. It's inviting you to step forward with awareness rather than unconscious momentum. Let's turn now to the ancient stories that have carried these psychological truths for millennia. These aren't just entertaining tales. They're maps of the human psyche showing us patterns that existed long before psychology had a name for them. Consider the Greek myth of Psyche. In this story, Psyche is married to Eros, the god of love. But there's a condition: she must never look at him. He only comes to her in darkness. She's forbidden to see who he truly is. For a while, Psyche obeys. She enjoys the love, the connection, but without full knowledge. without being fully seen or seeing fully, but eventually driven by curiosity and the doubt planted by her jealous sisters. Psyche lights a lamp in the night to look at her divine lover, and the moment she sees him, the moment light and visibility enter the relationship, he disappears. Eros flees wounded by her transgression. What does this myth tell us psychologically? It speaks to our deep fear that if we truly look at something, if we bring consciousness and visibility to it, we'll destroy it. That if we really try, if we really show up fully, we'll lose what we have. Better to stay in the dark to never know for certain, to avoid the moment of revelation that might shatter everything. This is the procrastinator's fear. If I really finish this project and put it out there, I'll discover whether I'm actually talented or just deluding myself. If I have that honest conversation, I'll discover whether the relationship can survive truth. If I pursue this dream fully, I'll discover whether I'm capable or not. The lamp of consciousness feels dangerous. Darkness feels safer. But the story doesn't end there. Psyche must undergo a series of impossible tasks, descending even into the underworld to win back Eros. She must face her fear, endure trials, grow beyond who she was. And ultimately, she's transformed. She becomes a goddess herself, immortal, and her union with Eros becomes conscious and complete. The moral isn't to stay in darkness. It's that the journey through consciousness, though painful, leads to transformation. Another powerful myth is the biblical story of Jonah. God calls Jonah to go to Nineveh to deliver a message. Jonah's response, he runs in the opposite direction. He boards a ship heading as far from Nineveh as possible. This is procrastination as literal flight. Jonah knows what he's supposed to do, but he avoids it completely. The story continues with Jonah being thrown into the sea during a storm and swallowed by a great whale. He spends 3 days in the belly of the whale, in total darkness, unable to escape. This is the procrastinator's nightmare, being trapped in the consequence of avoidance in the dark, digested by the thing you were trying to escape. But psychologically, the whale's belly represents something crucial. It's a forced confrontation with what you've been avoiding. It's the space of no escape where you have to finally face yourself, your calling, your truth. The 3 days in darkness are a kind of death and rebirth. Jonah emerges transformed, finally ready to do what he was called to do. The teaching here is profound. Your avoidance won't make the calling go away. It will only delay the inevitable confrontation. And the longer you delay, the more dramatic the confrontation becomes. Better to face it willingly than to be swallowed by the consequences of endless avoidance. Fairy tales also carry these psychological truths. Consider Rapunzel locked in a tower by a witch. The witch represents the internalized shame figure, the critical voice that keeps you imprisoned. Rapunzel's hair, that golden connection to the outside world, grows longer and longer, but it's controlled entirely by the witch. She can only lower it when the witch demands, when it serves the witch's purposes. Psychologically, Rapunzel represents the beautiful parts of yourself. Your creativity, your voice, your expression, locked away by the shamekeeper. Your hair, your connection to the world, your means of expression exists, but it's not truly yours. You can't use it freely. You can only express yourself in ways that the internal critic permits. Rapunzel's liberation comes when she hears the prince's voice, when someone from outside reflects back to her that she's worth connecting with. But even then, the witch punishes her cuts. Her hair exiles her to the wilderness. The fairy tale understands that beginning to reclaim your authentic expression will trigger the shamekeeper's rage. It will feel dangerous. It will have consequences. But the story ends with Rapunzel reunited with the prince, her tears healing his blindness. The message, the very vulnerability and authenticity that was punished, that led to exile, ultimately becomes the source of healing and restoration. These patterns appear again and again across cultures. In Buddhist teaching, there's the concept of dukkha, often translated as suffering, but more accurately meaning unsatisfactoriness or inability to be at ease. The Buddha taught that much of our suffering comes from clinging or avoiding. We cling to things we think will make us happy. We avoid things we think will make us suffer. But the clinging and avoiding themselves create suffering. Procrastination is a form of avoidance that creates its own dukkha. You avoid the task to avoid potential suffering, but the avoidance itself makes you suffer. The Buddha's teaching points toward a third way, neither clinging to idealized outcomes nor avoiding challenging actions, but meeting what is with presence and equanimity. This is relevant for procrastination because it suggests the way through isn't force or avoidance, but mindful presence with what is. Let's move to literature, where these archetypal patterns find sophisticated expression in character and story. Dante's Inferno. The first part of the Divine Comedy depicts the poet's journey through hell, guided by the Roman poet Virgil. Before they even enter hell proper, they encounter the Ante-Inferno, a space for those who refused to choose. Not evil people exactly, but people who lived without making meaningful commitments, who never took a side, who never truly acted. They're neither in hell nor in heaven. They exist in perpetual limbo, forever chasing a banner they can never catch. This is Dante's vision of what happens to the procrastinator's soul. Not dramatic punishment for evil, but the quiet torment of perpetual non-commitment, of always running after something you can't grasp, because you never actually commit to grasping it. The punishment fits the crime. In life, they wouldn't choose. In death, they chase eternally without achieving. Consider Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground, one of literature's most piercing portraits of shame-based paralysis. The underground man is brilliant, hyper-conscious, aware of everything. But this awareness cripples him. He can see every angle of every situation. He anticipates every criticism. He imagines every possible outcome. And in this state of total consciousness, he becomes incapable of action. He describes himself as a sick man, a spiteful man, an unattractive man. This is shame crystallized into identity. He's turned his inadequacies into his essence. And from this place, action becomes impossible, because any action might confirm what he already fears, that he's contemptible, that he'll be rejected, that he doesn't belong in society. The underground man retreats literally underground into his consciousness, into his head, where he can maintain fantasies of superiority while never having to test them against reality. This is procrastination as existential strategy. If he never acts, he never fails. If he never shows up, he never gets rejected. He preserves his fragile ego by hiding from the world. But Dostoevsky shows us the cost: profound misery, isolation, a life unlived. The underground man is aware enough to see his own prison, but feels powerless to leave it. This is the torment of conscious procrastination, when you know you're avoiding, but feel unable to stop. Franz Kafka's The Trial presents another angle on this psychological pattern. Joseph K. is arrested and put on trial, but he's never told what he's accused of. He spends the entire novel trying to understand the charges against him, navigating an incomprehensible bureaucracy, endlessly delaying and delayed. He dies without ever knowing his crime. Read psychologically. This is the experience of internalized shame without clear origin. You feel guilty accused on trial, but you don't know exactly why. You just know something about you is wrong, unacceptable, deserving of punishment. And in this state, you can never defend yourself because you don't know what you're defending against. You can never make amends because you don't know what you did wrong. You can only delay, defer hope that if you just follow the process long enough, clarity will come. This is what it feels like for many procrastinators. There's a vague sense of not being good enough, of being on trial, of needing to prove yourself before you can move forward. But the standards are never clear. The judges are invisible. And so you stay in a perpetual state of preparation, of not quite ready, of needing one more thing before you can proceed. Elena Ferrante's Neapolitan novels, particularly on the character of Lila, show us another dimension, the cost of hiding brilliance in an environment that can't handle it. Lila is a genius, but she's born into poverty in mid-century Naples, a world that has no place for a brilliant, ambitious woman from her background. Her intelligence threatens everyone around her. Her creativity has nowhere to go. Throughout the novels, we see Lila's potential repeatedly suppressed, sometimes by circumstances, often by her own choices to hide, to not pursue opportunities to keep her brilliance under wraps. This isn't simple procrastination. It's protective withholding in a hostile environment. Sometimes delay is adaptive. Sometimes hiding is survival. This is important because it reminds us that procrastination isn't always just internal psychology. Sometimes the environment genuinely isn't safe. Sometimes holding back is wisdom, not fear. The question is, knowing this, how do you distinguish between justified caution and the automatic shame response? How do you know when the environment has changed enough that you could risk visibility? Let's turn now to symbolic systems that encode psychological wisdom. The tarot, whatever you believe about its mystical properties, is at minimum a sophisticated symbolic system that maps psychological states and transformations. The card most relevant to procrastination is the Hanged Man, numbered 12 in the major arcana. The image shows a figure suspended upside down from a tree, or cross one leg, bent arms, often behind the back. But crucially, the figure's face is serene, not tortured. This is not punishment. It's a voluntary pause. The Hanged Man represents suspension, seeing from a different angle, waiting in a state that looks passive, but is actually gestating something new. Psychologically, this card suggests that sometimes what looks like procrastination is actually a necessary pause. Not all forward momentum is progress. Sometimes you need to stop to hang suspended to see things from a completely different perspective before you can proceed wisely. The shadow side of the Hanged Man, however, is when the suspension becomes permanent, when the pause becomes paralysis, when the different perspective becomes an excuse for never acting. The key wisdom of this card: there's a difference between sacred pause and fearful avoidance. Sacred pause is conscious, chosen, and temporary. It serves transformation. Fearful avoidance is unconscious, compulsive, and indefinite. It serves the status quo of hiding. In alchemical tradition, which Jung studied extensively, there's a process called the nigredo, the blackening. This is the first stage of transformation, where the material must be broken down, dissolved, decomposed, before it can be reformed into something new. In psychological terms, sometimes what looks like stagnation or procrastination is actually nigredo, the necessary dark phase where old forms are dissolving to make way for new ones. You cannot rush the nigredo. Trying to force transformation before the breakdown is complete creates false integration, a superficial change that doesn't last. Sometimes procrastination is your psyche's way of saying, you're in the nigredo. Things need to break down more fully. You're not ready for the next phase because you haven't completed this one. But again, the shadow side, the nigredo, is a phase, not a permanent state. If you stay in breakdown indefinitely, nothing new emerges. The art is learning to sense when you're authentically in a necessary dark phase versus when you're using that idea to avoid forward movement. Now let's consider the shadow side of the shame archetype itself. What happens when shame remains unconscious and unintegrated? When shame is in your shadow, unacknowledged, it becomes a tyrannical internal persecutor. It manifests as that harsh inner critic that tells you you're not good enough, you'll never succeed, you should just give up. It shows up as perfectionism, the inability to create anything unless it's flawless, which, of course, nothing ever is. It creates self-sabotage where you unconsciously undermine your own efforts, because succeeding would require you to change your identity from not good enough to potentially adequate or even good. In our culture, we see collective manifestations of unintegrated shame. Cancel culture, whatever its legitimate functions, often involves projection of our own unintegrated shame onto others. We can't face our own inadequacies, so we find someone to publicly shame, temporarily relieving our own internal pressure. Imposter syndrome has become epidemic, this feeling that you're a fraud who will inevitably be exposed. This is shame about having achieved something, about being visible in success. Social media has amplified all of this. We perform curated versions of ourselves, creating elaborate personas while hiding anything that might be judged. We compare our inner reality to others' outer performance, generating constant shame about our inadequacy. The comment culture normalizes anonymous criticism, creating an environment where visibility genuinely is more dangerous than it used to be, because there are more opportunities for public shaming. The procrastination shadow can become identity. You might start to define yourself as just a procrastinator, as if it's a fixed trait, rather than a behavior pattern rooted in understandable psychological dynamics. This is dangerous because once procrastination becomes who you are, rather than what you do, change feels impossible. You're not changing behavior. You'd have to change your entire sense of self. There's often a hidden payoff to procrastination that we don't want to acknowledge. As long as you never finish, never truly try, you preserve the possibility that you could be great. You maintain the fantasy. A finished project that's mediocre is harder to bear than an unfinished project that might be brilliant. Procrastination protects you from the definitive answer about your abilities. The integration pathway for all of this begins with recognition. Recognize that procrastination is a symptom, not your identity. It's something your psyche is doing for protective reasons, not a fundamental flaw in who you are. Then you need to dialogue with the procrastinating part, not to condemn it, but to understand it. Ask, what are you protecting me from? What danger are you sensing? You'll often discover that the procrastinating part is protecting your sense of self-worth, your hope for the future, your dream of who you might be. It's afraid that action will lead to crushing disappointment. This part needs to be heard and understood, not overcome through force. Finally, you need to reclaim the disowned parts that the procrastination is protecting. If you pushed away your ambition because it was shamed, you need to reclaim it consciously in measured doses. If you hid your creativity because it was ridiculed, you need to practice expressing it in safe contexts. If you buried your vulnerability because it was exploited, you need to risk it with trustworthy people. This is shadow integration, bringing into consciousness what was hidden. How do these ancient patterns manifest in our contemporary world everywhere? Consider films like Black Swan, where the protagonist's perfectionism and inability to embody both the white and black swan, both innocence and sensuality, drives her to psychological breakdown. She can't integrate her shadow, so it destroys her. This is what happens when procrastination's underlying perfectionism becomes extreme. In music, Kendrick Lamar's song, You, is one of the rawest portrayals of self-hatred and shame ever recorded. He confronts himself brutally, expressing the harsh inner critic that tells him he's failing, that he's a fraud, that he should feel ashamed. It's almost painful to listen to because it's so honest about internal shame. This is the voice many procrastinators know intimately, the voice that makes action feel impossible. Social media platforms have become engines of shame and performance anxiety. The highlight reel culture means everyone presents their best moments while hiding struggles. You see others' success and compare it to your own behind-the-scenes struggle, generating shame. Then that shame makes you procrastinate on your own goals because you feel you could never measure up. Then you don't post about what you're working on, so others don't see your struggles, and the cycle perpetuates. Modern institutions amplify shame too. Corporate hustle culture shames rest and recovery, treating human limitations as moral failings. This creates burnout and then procrastination as your nervous system forces rest through shutdown when you won't choose it consciously. Academic pressure creates perfectionism that leads to paralysis. Students unable to start papers because they're terrified they won't be excellent. Dating apps create relational procrastination where people ghost rather than have honest conversations because vulnerability feels too dangerous in a world of infinite options and judgment. We're even seeing collective procrastination on crucial issues like climate change. It's not that we don't know what needs to be done. It's that the scale of the problem triggers collective overwhelm and shame. We feel inadequate to the task, so we delay. We deny, we distract ourselves, just like an individual procrastinator delays on a project that feels too big and important. The good news in all of this is that recognizing these patterns as universal, archetypal, ancient can reduce shame. You're not uniquely broken. You're participating in patterns that have existed as long as humans have existed. The challenge of showing up authentically in a world that might reject you is not new. The fear of being visible has always been part of the human experience. Myths and stories exist to help us navigate these eternal challenges. And that's the gift of this archetypal perspective. It connects your personal struggle to the larger human story. You're not alone in this. You're walking a path that heroes and ordinary people have walked in every culture across time. And the stories show us that the way forward exists, though it's not easy. The way forward is always toward consciousness, toward integration, toward having the courage to be seen, even though it's frightening. The way forward requires facing the shadow, reclaiming what was hidden, and stepping past the threshold guardian. But to fully understand how to do this, we need to look at what modern science tells us about shame, procrastination, and the nervous system. We need to ground these archetypal insights in the concrete reality of brain and body. This is psychology for sleep. In another sense, understanding how the neuroscience of trauma and shame creates patterns that feel as automatic as breathing, as involuntary as dreams. But unlike dreams, these patterns can be changed once you understand the mechanisms. Let's begin with precise definitions of what we're discussing. From a research perspective, Dr. Timothy Feichel defines procrastination as the voluntary delay of an intended action, despite expecting to be worse off for the delay. This definition is important because it distinguishes procrastination from legitimate strategic delay or simple preference. True procrastination involves knowing you're making things worse for yourself and doing it anyway. Dr. Joseph Ferrari, who has studied chronic procrastination for decades, makes a crucial distinction between different types. Arousal procrastinators seek the thrill of working under pressure. They're not particularly shame-driven. But avoidant procrastinators, which describe most people struggling with chronic delay, are motivated by fear. Fear of failure, fear of evaluation, fear of confirming negative beliefs about themselves. This is the shame-driven procrastination we're exploring tonight. Shame itself needs careful definition. Dr. Brené Brown, who has spent years researching shame, defines it as the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. Not that we did something bad, but that we are bad. This core belief about unworthiness drives much of our protective behavior, including procrastination. Researchers measure procrastination using various scales. The pure procrastination scale asks questions about how often you delay starting tasks, how often you finish tasks close to deadlines, how often you feel your procrastination is a problem. The Tuckman procrastination scale measures tendency to delay unnecessarily. These tools help researchers study the phenomenon systematically. Shame is harder to measure directly because people are often ironically ashamed to admit they feel shame. But researchers use various approaches, including the test of self-conscious affect and interviews using Brown's framework of shame resilience. Studies consistently show strong correlations between shame proneness and procrastination, stronger than correlations with other personality traits like conscientiousness. There's also growing research on adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. These are traumatic events in childhood, like abuse, neglect, household dysfunction, Studies show that higher ACE scores predict higher rates of numerous difficulties in adulthood, including procrastination. The mechanism isn't mysterious. Childhood trauma teaches your nervous system that the world is dangerous, that you're inadequate to handle challenges, that visibility leads to pain. These beliefs shape behavior decades later. Now let's trace how this develops across the lifespan, because understanding the developmental origins of shame and procrastination helps us approach them with more compassion and clarity. In early childhood, from birth through about age 12, the foundations are laid. Attachment theory, developed by John Bowlby and studied extensively by Mary Ainsworth, shows that the quality of early caregiving shapes lifelong patterns. Secure attachment, where a child feels consistently seen, valued, and comforted, creates an internal sense of safety that allows for healthy risk-taking and self-expression later in life. But insecure attachment patterns create different legacies. Anxious attachment develops when caregiving is inconsistent. The child never knows if their needs will be met, so they become hypervigilant, always scanning for signs of approval or rejection. In adulthood, this often manifests as perfectionism and procrastination. The person delays because they're terrified the work won't be perfect enough to guarantee approval. Avoidant attachment develops when emotional needs are repeatedly dismissed or punished. The child learns to suppress needs and feelings to disconnect from authentic desires. In adulthood, this can show up as procrastination around goals that require authentic self-expression. The person delays because they're disconnected from what they actually want, pursuing goals that feel empty or imposed. Disorganized attachment, the result of frightening or extremely inconsistent caregiving, creates the most challenging legacy. The person can't develop coherent strategies for seeking safety because the caregiver was both the source of comfort and the source of threat. In adulthood, this can create chaotic patterns of approach and avoidance, dramatic swings between motivation and paralysis. Shame development itself begins around 18 to 24 months, according to developmental psychologist Michael Lewis. This is when children develop self-awareness, the ability to see themselves as separate beings who can be evaluated. Before this, an infant can feel distress, but not shame. Shame requires the cognitive capacity to have beliefs about your self-worth. The critical period is how caregivers respond. When the child makes mistakes, has accidents, expresses strong emotions, or behaves in ways the adults find challenging. If mistakes are met with patience and teaching, the child learns that errors are part of learning. If mistakes are met with harsh criticism, mockery, or withdrawal of affection, the child learns that being imperfect is dangerous. They internalize shame. I spoke once with a woman who remembered a moment from when she was 4 years old with unusual clarity. She had painted a picture at preschool and was excited to show her mother. When her mother picked her up, she held out the painting proudly. Her mother glanced at it and said, "That's nice," in a distracted tone, then continued her conversation with another parent. My client at 4 years old felt something collapse inside. The message she internalized: my creativity doesn't matter. My excitement is a burden. I should contain myself. That moment and thousands like it shaped her relationship to creative expression for the next 3 decades. As an adult, she chronically procrastinated on creative projects, never understanding why something she loved felt so difficult to approach. When we uncovered this memory and others like it, the pattern finally made sense. Her nervous system had learned that showing creative work leads to dismissal. Procrastination was protection. In adolescence, from roughly 13 to 19, shame becomes even more powerful because it intersects with identity formation. The adolescent brain, as Dr. Dan Siegel's research shows, is hypersensitive to peer judgment and social evaluation. The neural systems involved in perceiving social threat are highly activated during this period. This is adaptive in some ways. Humans are social animals, and learning to navigate group dynamics is crucial. But it also means teenagers are exquisitely vulnerable to shame. If an adolescent experiences significant shame during this period, being mocked for their appearance, intelligence interests, or personality, it can shape their identity for years. They might develop a core belief that they're fundamentally unacceptable, that their authentic self is shameful. This belief then drives procrastination in adulthood, especially around identity-relevant goals. The aspiring writer who was mocked for their stories in 7th grade struggles to write as an adult. The person who was humiliated about their body during puberty avoids anything that increases physical visibility, like exercise or dating. In adulthood, these patterns typically crystallize into stable traits unless interrupted by new experiences or therapeutic work. Dr. Kristen Neff's research on self-compassion shows that adults with low self-compassion, which is strongly related to shame, show significantly higher procrastination rates. They're harsh self-critics who can't bear the possibility of further self-judgment that might come from trying and failing. But there's variability in how childhood experiences translate into adult patterns. Some people seem remarkably resilient despite difficult childhoods. Others struggle despite seemingly advantageous circumstances. Why individual differences in temperament, in neurobiological sensitivity, in whether they found even one person who provided a corrective relationship. It's never deterministic. Early experiences create vulnerabilities, not destinies. In later adulthood, an aging interest and patterns emerge. Some research suggests that procrastination decreases with age. Dr. Erik Erikson's stage theory proposes that older adults face the challenge of integrity versus despair. They're reviewing their lives, assessing whether they lived authentically or avoided their calling. This confrontation with mortality can actually reduce procrastination for some people. They realize time is limited. The fear of dying with unlived dreams exceeds the fear of failure. But for others, shame about unlived life intensifies. They look back at all the times they procrastinated, all the opportunities they missed, and the regret is crushing. This can lead to despair and, ironically, more procrastination. It's too late now becomes the new excuse. The hopeful message is that change is possible at any age. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new neural pathways, continues throughout life. The patterns created in childhood are deep but not immutable. New experiences, new relationships, therapy, conscious practice, all of these can create new patterns. Now let's look at the neurobiological basis of shame and procrastination. What's actually happening in your brain and body when you avoid that important task? prefrontal cortex, located in the front of your brain, just behind your forehead, is your executive function center. It's involved in planning, decision-making, impulse control, and initiation of action. When you set a goal and make a plan, your prefrontal cortex is engaged. But here's the problem. When you're experiencing shame or remembering past shame, the function of your prefrontal cortex is impaired. Studies using brain imaging show that emotional distress, including shame, reduces activity in the prefrontal cortex. Your executive functions go offline. This is why you can know intellectually that you should work on the project, that delaying will make things worse, but you still can't seem to make yourself do it. The part of your brain responsible for translating intention into action is compromised. The amygdala, often called the brain's alarm system, is a small almond-shaped structure deep in the brain that detects threats. When you face a physical threat, like a dog running toward you aggressively, your amygdala activates your fight or flight response. But the amygdala can't distinguish between physical and psychological threats. When a task is associated with past shame, with memories of judgment or failure, your amygdala treats approaching that task like approaching danger. So you feel anxious, your heart might race slightly, you get an urge to escape. And your modern escape is distraction. You open social media. You suddenly remember you need to do laundry. You decide this is the perfect time to research a completely unrelated topic. This isn't weak willpower. This is your threat detection system, doing exactly what it's designed to do, get you away from danger. The problem is that the danger isn't real in the present moment. It's a memory, but your amygdala doesn't care. It responds to the association between this task and past pain. The anterior cingulate cortex, or ACC, is involved in conflict monitoring and error detection. It's active when you're aware that what you're doing conflicts with what you intend to do. Research on procrastinators shows overactivity in the ACC. They're constantly aware of the conflict between their intentions and their behavior, which creates a kind of mental static, a constant background discomfort. For chronic procrastinators, the ACC is hyperactive. They're painfully aware they're avoiding. They're monitoring themselves constantly, which increases shame, which impairs the prefrontal cortex, which makes action even harder. It's a vicious cycle, mediated by brain structures. The default mode network, or DMN, is a set of brain regions that are active when you're not focused on the external world. It's involved in self-referential thought, mind-wandering, and rumination. Research shows that the DMN is overactive in people who procrastinate chronically. Instead of engaging with the task, their brain keeps defaulting to internal narrative, often self-critical narrative. I'm so bad at this. Why can't I just do it? What's wrong with me? This rumination feels like thinking, but it's actually avoidance. Shame activates the DMN, pulling you into self-focused negative thinking. You're thinking about yourself, about your inadequacy, rather than thinking about the task. This is why procrastination often feels like being trapped in your own head. Let's talk about neurotransmitters and hormones, the chemical messengers that affect your mood, motivation, and behavior. Dopamine is involved in motivation and reward. When you anticipate something pleasurable, dopamine increases, driving you toward that thing. But here's the problem. With shame-associated tasks, they don't trigger dopamine release. even if the task is important to you intellectually, if it's associated with shame or fear, your dopamine system doesn't engage. The task feels unrewarding even when you know it aligns with your values. You have to rely entirely on conscious effort, which is exhausting and often fails. Some research suggests that chronic shame exposure can dysregulate the dopamine system, making it harder to feel motivated generally. You're not lazy. Your reward system is compromised by years of associating meaningful action with potential shame. Cortisol is your primary stress hormone. In acute stress, it's helpful mobilizing energy to deal with threats. But a chronic shame creates chronic elevation of cortisol. High cortisol impairs memory, reduces cognitive flexibility, and increases anxiety. It also promotes avoidance behavior. Your body is trying to protect you from what it perceives as ongoing threat. Chronic procrastinators often have dysregulated cortisol levels. Their baseline stress is high, and approaching avoided tasks spikes it further. Procrastination becomes a way of managing cortisol, of keeping stress from becoming overwhelming. The problem is that it only works short term. The longer term stress of uncompleted tasks and missed deadlines builds anyway. Serotonin is involved in mood regulation and feelings of self-worth. Low serotonin is associated with depression and low self-esteem. Shame has been linked to disrupted serotonin function. When you feel fundamentally unworthy, when shame is chronic, your serotonin system struggles. And low serotonin makes it harder to initiate action, to feel confident enough to try. This isn't to reduce everything to neurochemistry. Your thoughts and experiences affect these systems, and these systems affect your thoughts and experiences. It's bidirectional. But understanding the biological dimension helps explain why procrastination can feel so involuntary, so impossible to overcome through willpower alone. Now let's examine the empirical research across different domains of psychology. In cognitive psychology, Dr. Piers Steele at the University of Calgary conducted a massive meta-analysis examining over 800 studies on procrastination. His findings: procrastination correlates most strongly with low self-confidence, low self-esteem, and fear of failure, not with lack of time management skills or intelligence. He also identified what he calls temporal discounting, the tendency to prioritize immediate mood repair over future goals. When you feel the anxiety of approaching a shameful task, your brain calculates that the immediate relief of avoidance feels more valuable than the distant benefit of completion. The future consequences feel abstract, but the present discomfort feels immediate and intense. Dr. Timothy Feichel's work has focused on procrastination as mood regulation. In studies where participants tracked their emotions and procrastination in real time, he found that people procrastinate when tasks generate negative emotions like anxiety, fear, insecurity. They're not avoiding the task. They're avoiding the feeling associated with the task. His research also shows something crucial. Self-forgiveness works better than self-criticism in breaking procrastination cycles. Students who were taught to forgive themselves for procrastinating on the first exam procrastinated less on the second exam. Students who criticized themselves for procrastinating on the first exam procrastinated more on the second. Shame doesn't motivate, it paralyzes. In social psychology, Dr. Brené Brown's decade-plus of research has mapped the territory of shame comprehensively. Through thousands of interviews, she found that shame is strongly associated with addiction, depression, aggression, violence, bullying, and suicide. Shame is not a useful or benign emotion. It's deeply destructive. Her research also shows that shame thrives on secrecy, silence, and judgment, but loses power when we share our shame experiences with people who respond with empathy. This has direct implications for procrastination. The more you hide your procrastination in shame, the more powerful it becomes. The more you can talk about it with someone who doesn't judge you, the more power you reclaim. Karen Horney, a psychoanalyst, described the gap between the idealized self and the real self as a source of profound anxiety and shame. The idealized self is who you think you should be: perfect, effortless, accomplished. The real self is fallible, limited learning. The wider the gap, the more shame you feel. Procrastination serves to protect the idealized self by preventing reality testing. If you never finish the project, you can maintain the fantasy that you could be brilliant if you tried. Modern studies confirm this. Perfectionism and procrastination are strongly linked, but it's a particular kind of perfectionism that matters most: socially prescribed perfectionism, the belief that others expect perfection from you and will reject you if you're imperfect. This is learned typically in families where love was conditional on achievement or performance. In clinical psychology, research on therapy for procrastination has yielded interesting findings. Cognitive behavioral approaches that challenge the thoughts underlying procrastination help significantly. For example, challenging the thought, "If it's not perfect, it's worthless," or "My worth depends on how well I perform." But increasingly, researchers are finding that approaches incorporating self-compassion and addressing underlying shame are even more effective. Dr. Fred Luskin at Stanford's Forgiveness Project found that teaching people to forgive themselves, including for past procrastination, reduced future procrastination more than teaching them time management skills. Dr. Kristen Neff's work on self-compassion has shown that people who score high on self-compassion procrastinate significantly less than people with low self-compassion. And crucially, self-compassion doesn't reduce standards or make people complacent. It just reduces the shame paralysis that prevents people from trying. Self-compassion involves 3 elements: self-kindness rather than self-judgment, common humanity rather than isolation, and mindfulness rather than over-identification with emotions. When procrastination is approached with these elements, it becomes workable. You can acknowledge that you're avoiding without condemning yourself. Recognize that many people struggle with this without feeling uniquely broken, and observe the feelings driving avoidance without being controlled by them. In applied domains like organizational behavior, research shows that workplace procrastination has massive costs. Dr. Piers Steele estimates it costs over $10,000 per employee annually in lost productivity. But the causes aren't what you'd expect. It's not that workers are lazy, it's that workplace cultures often create psychological unsafety, where people fear negative evaluation, where mistakes are punished harshly, where perfectionism is demanded. Organizations that create psychologically safe environments where people can take risks without fear of shaming show 30% less procrastination. The less in procrastination is often a response to environmental conditions, not just individual pathology. In educational settings, research by Dr. Angela Duckworth on grit found that perseverance predicts success better than intelligence. But here's what's often missed: shame undermines grit. Students who feel ashamed about their abilities procrastinate more despite high intelligence. They're smart enough to succeed, but too ashamed to try. Growth mindset interventions developed by Dr. Carol Dweck help reduce shame-based academic procrastination, teaching students that abilities develop through effort rather than being fixed traits reduces the shame associated with struggle or failure. If difficulty means you're learning, not that you're inadequate, procrastination lessens. Individual differences matter tremendously. Not everyone responds to shame with procrastination. Personality traits mediate the relationship. Regarding the big 5 personality dimensions, people low in conscientiousness procrastinate more, which makes sense. Conscientiousness involves self-discipline and organization. But interestingly, people very high in conscientiousness can also procrastinate when combined with high shame. They become perfectionistic, unable to start unless conditions are perfect. High neuroticism predicts more procrastination because neurotic individuals experience negative emotions more intensely and frequently. They're more shame-prone and more avoidant. But environmental factors and learned coping strategies can moderate this. Very high agreeableness sometimes predicts procrastination on self-focused goals. Highly agreeable people prioritize others' needs and may unconsciously procrastinate on their own goals because pursuing them feels selfish or might disappoint others. Attachment styles continue to influence adult behavior. Research shows that people with anxious attachment procrastinate about 40% more than securely attached individuals. The mechanism: they're preoccupied with approval, terrified of rejection, unable to tolerate the uncertainty of how their work will be received. People with avoidant attachment procrastinate differently. They're disconnected from their authentic desires, pursuing goals that feel imposed or meaningless. They procrastinate because the goal doesn't actually matter to them, even if they think it should. Temperament differences also matter. Dr. Elaine Aron's research on highly sensitive persons shows that about 20% of people are HSPs, meaning they process stimuli more deeply and are more affected by their environment. ASPs are more vulnerable to shame from criticism because they take things in more deeply. They may procrastinate more on tasks that risk evaluation because the potential shame feels more overwhelming to their sensitive nervous systems. Let's look at explanatory models that help us understand the mechanisms. Temporal motivation. Theory developed by Dr. Pierce Steele provides a mathematical formula for motivation. Motivation equals expectancy times value divided by impulsivity times delay. Expectancy is your confidence you can succeed. Value is how much you care about the outcome. Impulsivity is your tendency toward distraction. Delay is how far in the future the reward is. Shame affects both expectancy and value. If you're ashamed, you don't expect to succeed. You don't value the goal as much because achievement feels dangerous. So motivation plummets, even though intellectually you care about the goal. Self-determination theory developed by Edward Desai and Richard Ryan identifies 3 psychological needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. When these needs are met, motivation is intrinsic and sustainable. When they're unmet, motivation becomes fragile. Shame violates all three needs. It violates autonomy because you're controlled by fear of judgment rather than acting from choice. It violates competence because it tells you you're inadequate. It violates relatedness because it tells you you're unworthy of connection. Procrastination becomes a way of protesting these violations, of refusing to play a game rigged against your psychological needs. Polyvagal theory, developed by Dr. Stephen Porges, is perhaps the most illuminating framework for understanding procrastination physiologically. Porges identified 3 states of the autonomic nervous system. The ventral vagal state is safety and social engagement. When you're in this state, your prefrontal cortex functions well, you can think clearly and act effectively. This is where you want to be to work productively. The sympathetic state is fight or flight. When you're threatened, your body mobilizes energy to fight or escape. You feel anxious, agitated, like you need to do something. The dorsal vagal state is freeze or shut down. When threat is overwhelming and fight or flight won't work, your nervous system shifts into immobilization. You feel numb, frozen, disconnected, unable to act. Procrastination is often dorsal vagal shutdown. The task feels threatening. Your nervous system has assessed it and determined that neither fighting it nor fleeing from it is viable. So it freezes. You shut down. You feel unable to move to start to engage. This isn't laziness or weakness. It's a phylogenetically ancient survival response. The pathway out requires returning to ventral vagal safety. How? Through co-regulation with safe others, through practices that signal safety to your body, through gradual exposure that teaches your nervous system the task isn't actually life-threatening. This is why forcing yourself doesn't work. You can't willpower your way out of a nervous system state. You have to shift the state. First, create conditions of safety. Then action becomes possible. All of this research and these frameworks point to a coherent understanding. Procrastination isn't a moral failing or a character flaw. It's an understandable response to genuine psychological and physiological states shaped by early experience. You're not broken. You're responding logically to a system that learned early on that visibility and vulnerability are dangerous. But understanding alone isn't enough. Knowledge must move toward action, toward integration, and that requires the hardest work of all: facing yourself, facing your unlived life, facing the parts you've been protecting through procrastination. This is the territory of the 4th pillar, where we leave behind the comfort of external understanding and turn toward the personal, the confrontational, the transformational. She gazes at you from across the years, that child you were, the one who learned that being fully herself was dangerous. She's still here, you know, not as a memory, but as a living presence in your adult body, in your hesitations, in your delays. And right now, while you're listening to this Psychology for Sleep essay, in the quiet hours, she's asking you, how much longer will we hide? You scroll through their feed again, don't you? Telling yourself you're just curious, just checking in, just being a good friend. But your jaw tightens, your stomach drops slightly. You feel it. That twist of something bitter you'd never admit out loud. You see their success, their completion, their forward movement, and you're still here, preparing to prepare, thinking about, starting, waiting for the right moment that never comes. Let me tell you what nobody wants to admit. You've been doing this because at some level you believe that being visible will confirm your worst fear, that you're not good enough, that you never were, that all those early messages about being too much or not enough were actually true. And if you really try, really show up, really finish something, and put it into the world, everyone will finally see what you've suspected about yourself all along. This isn't a time management problem. This is a soul problem. This is about how you've been living a half life, showing a half self, trying a half effort, because the full version feels like standing naked in front of a firing squad. And the voices from your past, the ones that first taught you to hide, they haven't gone away. They've just become your own voice now. Who do you think you are? You're not special. You're going to fail. Better not to try. What you call procrastination, Carl Jung would call living from the shadow. You're letting the disowned, frightened, ashamed parts of yourself make all your decisions. And they're keeping you small because small feels safer than exposed. Here's the pattern you need to see clearly. You tell yourself you'll do the thing tomorrow. You mean it. You genuinely intend to. But tomorrow comes, and that same heavy feeling arrives. That sense of not being ready. You do other productive things instead, easier things, things that don't require you to be vulnerable or visible. You stay busy to avoid the one thing that actually matters. And at the end of the day, you feel relief that you avoided it, and shame that you avoided it. The relief is immediate. The shame builds slowly, until the shame is so heavy, you can barely move. This is the shame avoidance shame loop, and you're trapped in it, not because you're weak, but because no one ever taught you that the way out is through, not around. No one ever told you that the fear of being seen will never go away. You don't wait until you're fearless. You learn to move while afraid. What you're actually trying to protect isn't your ego or your time. It's that younger version of you who was hurt when she was real, when he showed up authentically, when they expressed their truth. You're protecting that child from experiencing that pain again. And that's not wrong. That's actually tender. That's compassion toward your younger self. But here's what that younger self doesn't understand yet. The world now is not the world then. You're not that powerless child anymore. You have resources now. You can survive rejection now in ways you couldn't then. And more importantly, continuing to hide is its own kind of death. A slower death than public failure, but a death nonetheless. A death of possibility, of potential, of the life you're actually called to live. The culture you grew up in shaped this pattern. You've been told since childhood that you need to be perfect, that mistakes are shameful, that struggle should be hidden. Schools taught you that errors mean you're failing rather than learning. Workplaces reward the appearance of effortless competence while punishing visible difficulty. Media glorifies overnight success while editing out the years of invisible work. Social media creates the illusion that everyone else has it figured out, is moving forward confidently while you're the only one struggling. This serves the system you realize. Insecure people work harder, buy more, question themselves, instead of questioning power structures. Your shame is profitable to someone. Your belief that you're not enough keeps you consuming, producing, performing, desperate to finally feel adequate. If you're a woman, you were taught to be small, to be accommodating, to make yourself comfortable for others not to take up space. Ambition in you was called selfishness. Confidence was called arrogance. Visibility was called attention seeking. No wonder you procrastinate on things that would make you more visible. You were trained to hide. If you're a man, you were taught to be perfect, to show no weakness, to never fail to have it all figured out. Vulnerability in you was called weakness. Struggle was called failure. Asking for help was called incompetence. No wonder you procrastinate on things where you might need help or might not immediately excel. You were trained to appear invulnerable. These messages are in your bones now. They're not external anymore. They're the voice in your head that sounds like you, but isn't you. It's the accumulated judgments of everyone who ever made you feel like your authentic self was unacceptable. But here's where Jung's psychology for sleep and waking both becomes crucial. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Your procrastination feels like fate, like just who you are, like something unchangeable. But it's not. It's unconscious shame directing you. And once you see it, once you make it conscious, you can begin to choose differently. Shadow work requires you to look at what you've disowned. What part of yourself have you pushed away because it was once rejected? Was it your ambition? Many people learn early that wanting things, reaching for more, having big dreams is somehow wrong, greedy, selfish, above your station. So you pushed your ambition into shadow. And now, when you need ambition to pursue meaningful goals, it's not available. Procrastination fills the space where your ambition should be. Was it your intelligence? Some people, especially women and people from marginalized communities, learn that being smart threatens others. They get called know-it-alls, get socially punished for academic success, learn to downplay their intelligence to fit in. So intelligence gets pushed into shadow. And then in adulthood, when you're trying to do intellectually demanding work, something sabotages you. You procrastinate because letting your intelligence be fully visible still feels dangerous. Was it your creativity? Children are naturally creative until they're taught that there's a right way and a wrong way to do things, that art is for talented people, that original thinking is weird. So creativity gets hidden. And then, as an adult, creative projects are the hardest things to approach because they require the part of you that's been locked away. Was it your sensitivity? Boys especially are taught that emotions are weakness, that crying is shameful, that feeling deeply is unmanly, so sensitivity goes underground. And then relational or emotional work becomes impossible because it requires the sensitivity that was forbidden. Was it your confidence? If you grew up in an environment where confidence was punished as arrogance, where you were told to humble yourself, where standing tall felt dangerous, confidence became shadow. And now you can't access the confidence you need to put yourself forward, to promote your work, to take up the space you deserve. Whatever you pushed into shadow to be acceptable, that's what you're now trying to protect through procrastination. You delay because the task would require the disowned part to emerge. And emergence feels like danger. Jung also spoke about projection, how we externally see what we internally deny. You judge others for what you're not allowing in yourself. If you find yourself judging people who are ambitious, who self-promote, who take up space, who seem confident, Ask yourself, is that actually about them? Or is it about your disowned desire to do those things? Every person whose success triggers resentment in you is showing you something about your unlived life. Not that you need to be them or want what they have specifically, but they're expressing something you've forbidden yourself. They're being visible in ways you don't allow yourself to be, and your resentment is actually grief. Grief for the years you've spent hiding. Jung wrote about the persona, the mask we wear to be socially acceptable. The persona isn't false exactly. It's the version of you designed to get along in the world. But problems arise when the persona becomes the only version of yourself you allow to be seen. When the mask becomes so permanent, you forget what your face looks like underneath. When the task in front of you demands authenticity, emotional presence, real vulnerability, it asks you to act from behind the mask, from the hidden self, from the parts that still carry shame. And you can't, or you won't. Your psyche freezes. You delay. Not because you don't want to move forward, but because you're being pulled in two directions. The persona says, let's do what's expected, what's safe, what will be approved. The hidden self says, I can't show up in that false way anymore. I'm suffocating. And instead of resolving that tension, your mind just stops. You procrastinate. You don't choose. Because choosing authenticity feels dangerous, but choosing the mask feels like dying. Who are you without others' approval? Can you even answer that? Have you made so many decisions based on what others expect? What will be praised? What will avoid criticism? That you've lost track of what you actually want? Here's a question Jung would ask. Do you really want to finish that project? Start that business? Write that book? Or do you want it? Do you want it because it would make you look successful? Make others impressed? Prove you're valuable? Because if you're chasing goals that aren't actually yours, if they're about proving your worth, rather than expressing your essence, your psyche will sabotage them. It should. Those goals aren't serving your individuation. You're becoming who you truly are. And this is uncomfortable because you might realize you've been working on the wrong things, that the goal you've been procrastinating on isn't actually the problem. The problem is that it's not your goal. It's your parents' goal, or society's goal, or the goal of the persona you constructed to be acceptable. Real procrastination ends when you get ruthlessly honest about what you're actually called to do versus what you think you should do. Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But becoming who you truly are requires facing what you've been avoiding. It requires bringing the shadow into light. It requires dismantling the persona enough to let the real self breathe. And here's the brutal truth about individuation. Jung's term for the process of becoming whole, it's lonely. When you stop performing, people get uncomfortable. They preferred the manageable version of you. Your growth threatens them because it might require them to look at their own unlived lives. Some relationships won't survive your authenticity. People will misunderstand you. The crowd resents those who step away from collective identity and become individuals. You'll have nights when the old shame feels overwhelming, when you question everything, when hiding seems so much simpler than continuing this work. The wounded child within will scream for you to go back to safety, back to smallness, back to the known, even if it's suffocating. Nobody gives you a medal for shadow work. Your family won't necessarily understand. Your partner might feel destabilized by the changes in you. The world doesn't reward authenticity the way it rewards performance. You do the work in private, in the dark hours, in the space between who you were and who you're becoming. And it's invisible to most people. And this isn't a weekend workshop or a 30-day challenge. Jung knew that individuation is lifelong. Every new level of visibility will trigger new layers of shame. Every achievement brings up new fears. This is not something you complete and then you're done. It's a commitment, a practice, a perpetual choosing of consciousness over unconsciousness, authenticity over performance, self over persona. As Jung said, loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. When you start living from authenticity instead of shame, you might find yourself increasingly alone in a world that runs on performance and pretense. And that loneliness is real. It's the price of waking up. But what awaits on the other side makes the journey necessary. Not easy, but necessary. Internal changes that happen through integration. You no longer need constant external validation to feel worthy. You can receive praise without needing it to confirm your value. You can receive criticism without it destroying you. The opinion that matters most becomes your own, and your own opinion is informed by authentic values rather than shame messages. You cease to be controlled by the fear of judgment. You can hear someone's negative opinion of your work without collapsing, without taking it as evidence of your fundamental unworthiness. You can hold the paradox, this person doesn't like my work, and I'm still okay. My work has value even if not everyone sees it. You become capable of doing the thing even when you're scared. Fear becomes information, a signal that something matters, not an instruction to stop. You learn to recognize the difference between fear that warns of actual danger and fear that signals growth opportunity. You stop abandoning yourself to please others. For years, whenever there was a conflict between what you wanted and what others wanted, you abandoned yourself. You made yourself smaller, quieter, different to keep the peace. Now you can disappoint people without it destroying you. You can say no. You can prioritize your authentic needs over others' comfort. Your loyalty shifts from their comfort to your integrity. The people you attract shift fundamentally. When you stop performing, when you show up as you actually are, the people who were attached to your persona fall away. It can feel like loss, but simultaneously, you start attracting people who can meet your actual self. People who don't need you to be smaller. People who can handle your fullness. People who are doing their own work of integration. Relationships become cleaner. You can say no without guilt because you're not using yes to earn love. You can say yes without resentment because you're choosing from authenticity, not obligation. Your presence is real, not performed. Conflicts become opportunities for deeper understanding rather than threats to the relationship. You can finally be seen. Not the mask, not the carefully curated version, but the actual you. The messy, imperfect, still learning, sometimes afraid you. And it's terrifying. Every time someone really sees you, there's that moment of bracing for rejection. But increasingly, you survive being seen. And some people, the right people, meet you with recognition, not judgment. life becomes less about proving your worth and more about expressing it. You shift from, I need to show I'm valuable, to, I have something to offer. The difference is everything. One is desperate, performing, exhausting. The other is grounded, offering, sustainable. And when you meet another person who's done this work, someone who's faced their shadow, integrated their shame, chosen authenticity over approval, you'll recognize each other immediately. There will be a quality of presence, of realness, of not needing. They won't need you to perform. You won't need to pretend. You'll meet as two whole people, not as two halves seeking completion, not as fixer and project, not as parent and child, not as performer and audience, just as two humans who've remembered who they are beneath the conditioning. Jung called this meeting of individuated selves the highest form of relationship, not because it's easy or comfortable, but because it's real. The promise isn't that you'll become fearless. You won't. The promise isn't that procrastination will disappear entirely. Some delay, some hesitation will remain because you're human. The promise is that you'll understand it differently. You'll see it as information rather than evidence of your brokenness. And you'll have the tools to work with it consciously rather than being controlled by it unconsciously. The promise is that your life will start to feel like yours. Not the life you should want, not the life that would impress others, but the life that emerges from your actual values, desires, and calling. And even if that life is smaller in conventional terms, even if it doesn't look impressive from the outside, it will feel like home. It will feel like truth. And that's worth everything. You don't heal from procrastination by becoming more disciplined. Discipline is what you need once you're moving, but it can't create the initial movement. You heal by becoming more yourself, by understanding that the procrastination was never the problem. The hiding was, the shame was, the belief that your authentic self is unworthy of being seen was. Every time you interrupt the shame avoidance loop, even with one small step of awareness, you reclaim a piece of yourself. Every time you name the fear, instead of letting it control you silently, you reduce its power. Every time you show up anyway, imperfect and scared, you teach your nervous system that visibility isn't death. The work is to notice when the pattern activates, to pause when you feel the procrastination urge, not to force yourself into action, but to ask with compassion, what am I protecting? What part of me feels unsafe? What does this hesitation want me to know? And then to make a choice, not blindly pushing through, not collapsing into avoidance, but consciously choosing. Maybe today you choose to honor the fear and wait. That's okay. You're not broken for waiting, but you're choosing it consciously, acknowledging what's happening. Maybe today you choose to take one small step toward the scary thing while also acknowledging the fear. You're not pretending to be brave. You're being authentic with yourself about the difficulty while still moving. This is integration. Not eliminating the wounded parts, but bringing them into conscious relationship. Not destroying the persona, but understanding it as one part of you, rather than all of you. Not getting rid of the shadow, but making its contents conscious so they stop controlling you from hiding. Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Your procrastination is part of your darkness, not because it's evil, but because it's been unconscious, automatic, controlling you without your awareness. Making it conscious, understanding its roots and functions, seeing it clearly. This is the beginning of freedom. So this is the moment right now in these quiet hours when you decide. You can go back to sleep in the old way where you stay safe and small and hidden. Or you can wake up to the deeper truth. You're not too much, and you never were. You're not inadequate, and you never were. You were just young and wounded and surviving the best way you knew how. But you're not that child anymore. You have choice now. You have strength now. And the life you've been putting off the self, you've been protecting, the voice you've been hiding. It's time. Or perhaps it's not time yet, and that's honest too. But either way, you're choosing consciously now. The shame doesn't get to choose your future anymore. The shadow doesn't get to hold your potential hostage. You do. You choose. Not perfectly, not fearlessly, but consciously. And that changes everything. We return now to that place where we began. Dawn again. The desk. The blank page. The cursor that blinks with its patient, persistent question. But something has shifted during this long night of exploration through psychology, for sleep and waking both. The fog outside is lifted and slowly revealing the edges of things. Trees emerge from gray. The sky shifts from deep purple to something softer, more forgiving. The air still tastes of night, but morning is undeniable now. The birds have moved from tentative calls to full chorus, claiming the day without apology. Inside in the space you occupy, the weight is still there. That's honest. We haven't promised that understanding dissolves difficulty, but the weight has changed quality. It's shifted from the crushing shame of something's wrong with me to the more bearable truth of I'm carrying something difficult, something that makes sense, given where I've been. The thing you've been avoiding is still there. The project, the email, the application, the creative work. It hasn't disappeared, but maybe, just maybe your relationship to it has begun to shift. Maybe you can see now that your delay wasn't about laziness or weakness. It was about protection. Protection that made sense, that served you, that kept you safe when safety was scarce. We've traveled far tonight. We explored how procrastination begins in those early moments when being visible, being real, being fully yourself became associated with danger. How shame planted itself deep in your nervous system, long before you had words for what was happening. We saw this pattern reflected in ancient myths and fairy tales. Recognized that your struggle isn't personal failure, but participation in archetypal human challenges that have existed across all cultures and throughout time. We've understood the neuroscience, how shame lives in your amygdala and your nervous system, how it impairs your prefrontal cortex and activates your dorsal vagal freeze response, how what feels like moral failing is actually physiological response to perceived threat, how your body is trying to protect you in the only ways it knows. And we've turned toward the harder truth. That healing requires you to face what you've been protecting, to reclaim the parts pushed into shadow, to risk being seen even though it's terrifying, to choose consciousness over automatic pattern, even though consciousness is more uncomfortable, to become who you actually are rather than who you were taught you should be. This is not a simple journey. The path from unconscious shame to conscious authenticity is long and winding. There will be nights when you question everything, when hiding seems so much simpler than continuing to show up. There will be moments when the old terror of visibility feels overwhelming, when you're certain that being real will lead to rejection, when you wonder if it's all worth it. But there will also be moments when you catch yourself acting from truth instead of fear. When you notice the old pattern activating and consciously choose differently. When you do the thing despite the fear and discover you survive that, being seen doesn't destroy you. These moments accumulate. They create new neural pathways, new emotional associations, new possibilities. You're not behind. You haven't wasted the years you spent procrastinating. Those years were teaching you something, even if the lesson was painful. They were showing you the cost of hiding, building the motivation for change that no one else could build for you. Everything you've experienced has brought you to this moment, to this readiness, to this choice point. If you felt these words land somewhere in you, in that place beneath conscious thought where truth resonates, then something is already changing. Not because this essay gave you techniques or hacks or easy solutions, but because consciousness itself is transformative. Because seeing clearly begins the process of choosing differently. Jung understood that transformation doesn't happen through willpower or discipline or forcing. It happens through making the unconscious conscious, through bringing light to what's been hidden, through naming what's been controlling you silently. You've done that tonight. You've looked at your procrastination not as enemy, but as protective response. You've seen your shame not as truth, but as learned belief. You've recognized the pattern without condemning yourself for it. And that's enough to begin. That's everything needed to begin. You don't need to have it all figured out before you start. You don't need to feel ready. You don't need to be unafraid. You just need to know that the fear makes sense and choose to move anyway. One small step, not to prove anything, not to fix yourself, but to practice being visible in small doses, teaching your nervous system that the present is not the past, that you're not that vulnerable child anymore, that you can handle being seen now in ways you couldn't then. The cursor still blinks, the task still waits, but you're different now. You understand that the resistance isn't the enemy, it's information. It's a younger part of you saying, I remember when this was dangerous. And you can thank that part for protecting you, while also reassuring it we're safe enough now. We can try. We can be seen. And if we fail, we'll survive that too. May you find your way back to yourself. Not the self you were taught to be, but the one you've always been, beneath the conditioning, beneath the shame, beneath the protection. The self that's been waiting with patience, that defies understanding, for you to finally turn around and look. The dawn breaks fully now. The day begins. And you are here, awake, aware, and finally ready to be seen. Not perfectly, not fearlessly, but honestly. And that, as Jung knew, is where all real transformation begins. Not in the doing, but in the becoming. Not in the completion, but in the courage to be incomplete and still worthy. Not in the hiding, but in the gradual, terrifying, liberating practice of letting yourself be known. The psychology for sleep has brought you to waking. The understanding has brought you to the threshold of action. The awareness has brought you to choice. And whether you act tomorrow or you need more time, whether this is your moment or you're not quite there yet, You're no longer unconscious. You're no longer blindly repeating patterns. You're choosing now. Even choosing to wait is different when you're doing it consciously. And that consciousness, that awareness, that light you've brought to the darkness, no one can take that from you now. It's yours. You've done the hardest work, which is seeing. The rest is practice. Imperfect, ongoing, sometimes falling backward practice. But practice informed by understanding compassion and the recognition that you're not broken. You never were. You were just young and wounded and surviving. Now you're choosing to do more than survive. You're choosing to live fully, visibly, authentically, in whatever way you can manage today. And today is enough. Today is everything. The screen glows, the day waits, and you finally are ready to meet it.